All you.
Okay. Hello, everybody. This is the community meeting for August 17th. My name is Michael Rubin. I am involved in a bunch of SIGs, but have been primarily involved in the storage SIG. This meeting is posted publicly on YouTube, so please be mindful that what you say is being recorded and will be, presented broadly and publicly. Please mute when you're not speaking as a courtesy. It's kind of, that's basically it. Just be respectful of others. Cell phones off, and the demos are going to be time boxed for about 10 minutes. And talking to the Kubeless demo, it looks like that won't be a problem. Lots of interesting things going on today. Not only the demos and the release updates and some SIG updates, but we also have some things, announcements, especially talking about the steering committee. So without any other ado, I think we can start with Sebastian. Are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Cool. Do you want to provide your demo for Kubeless?
Yep.
Let's do it.
Cool. Hello, everyone. Boom, boom. Can you see my slides?
We
Yes.
can.
Okay, cool. If there's a problem, just let me know while I talk. So good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm going to give you a quick demo about Kube-less. I gave the first demo at the community meeting back in December. So it's been over 8 months already since we started this. We call it the Kubernetes native serverless solution. I'm Sebastian Guesgen at Sebgo on Twitter. I've done lots of things last few years on Kubernetes, like Compose, which graduated Cabin, the mobile application, K-Machine. I was involved in I wrote the LF certification course, blah, blah. I work at Bitnami. We do charts and things like Monocular, kubeconfig, sealed secrets, lots of tools around Kubernetes to help with application. So we're concentrated on application for any platform. So cloud, VM, native installers, containers, Kubernetes, and now serverless. We really want to understand what's going on with serverless. Why are people really excited about serverless and what we can do to help them? So Kubeless, kubeless.io, the website, there is an organization on GitHub, Kubeless. Of course, open source, non-affiliated. So mostly Bitnami people, but we put it in an org so that anybody can join and shouldn't feel like they're contributing to a Bitnami project. There is no plan to make this a commercial product. It's still right now, very much an effort to develop a solution on top of Kubernetes to help with the serverless. So what is Kubeless? It's really a Kubernetes extension, an extension of the API. We use TPR, so we're going to move to CRDs. But basically, we have a TPR that defines a function, and then we have a very nice controller that does things. What does that controller do? When you create a function, it creates deployment services. If needed, we create an ingress. All of this is automatic. We use config map, init containers. For now, this will probably change. A very nice thing is that we've instrumented all the runtimes, Python, Node.js, Ruby, with the Prometheus client. So when you launch a function, we automatically monitor the number of function calls, the duration of the function, and so on. We have a nice UI. And then we have an integration with the serverless plugin. So if you're not familiar with serverless, there is a startup, serverless.com. They are pretty much the de facto standard to deploy serverless functions on Lambda, Google Cloud Function, Azure Function, OpenWhisk, you name it, 20,000 stars on GitHub. So we now have a Kubeless plugin for serverless. And we're working on HPA to have dynamic scaling. So what type of apps are we talking about when we do serverless? Event-based, basically it's a Lambda clone, blah, blah. I'm trying to go fast here. And serverless, I'm going to show you what that is exactly. You have a link to the slides. So thank you in advance, and let's move to the demo. So the first demo is a basic function that's triggered via HTTP. So I'm going to do, convenience make here. And if you pay attention to the CLI call, you see how you use Kubeless. So there's a CLI. The CLI actually talks to the Kubernetes API server. It creates a custom resource, which is a function. Here you give it a name, post Python. You see that the function is triggered by HTTP. There is another type of trigger, which is event-based. You specify a runtime. Here it's Python, and then a handler. This is, it works like this for AWS Lambda as well. So you specify the file name and then the function name, and then where do you actually find your function. So what happens now is that underneath I have Minikube. So if you look at my pods now, it created a post Python pod. There is a deployment. It wrapped a service, you name it, and then I can just simply curl this, and it returns the basic hello world echo function. The function was pretty much hello with data. So it was a really simple echo function. So what happens here is that when you create the function, you create the custom resource, the controller creates a deployment, and that runtime injects that code, that little bit of source code, inside the pod through a config map. So the actual function is stored in a config map. So you see that we have here a post Python config map. So if I do, Python.yaml, you actually see the function in the config map. It's a little bit abusing config map, but it works quite well. Of course, underneath, since I've installed Kubeless, I have a third-party resource, and that means that now, I also have a concept of functions in Kubernetes. So get function post Python -o YAML, and I see my function. You see that there's a new API version, API group, and the kind is a function. So Kubernetes is now where a function, typical TPR, will move to CRDs. So that's pretty basic. That's HTTP triggers. Now, what we're envisioning is that we're going to be able to compose much more interested applications. Those applications are going to use different types of services. Some of those services may be deployed by Helm, for example. So here I've deployed Minio with Helm LS. You see Minio. That's why when I do my pods, you see that I have a Minio pod. So now I'm going to deploy a function, which is it's called a Slack function. So function deploy Slack, and now pay attention to the trigger. Now instead of being an HTTP trigger, it's being triggered on a topic, S3. So what's happening underneath is that if I actually list all my pods in my cluster, you see that in the Kubeless namespace here at the bottom, you see that I have my controller, it's Go, typical deployment. I also have a test Kafka setup with Zookeeper, Kafka 0, Zoo 0. So when I do functions that are triggered on events are being sent to the Kafka broker, and then the runtime that's being used for the function is actually a Kafka consumer, gets the message, passes the event to the function, and then the function is called. So we wrapped all of it together. So I look at my pods. So now I have my Slack function here. And of course, I didn't show you the CLI, but Kubeless function ls, you see that, well, okay, that's because the font is too big. You see the post Python, that's the first one. You see the Slack function. So what is exactly that Slack function? Let's go to our Minio browser. So Minio is very nice. It's an S3 clone. The reason I like Minio is because it sends event notification to Kafka. So I deploy it with Helm, and then I configure it so that when I put a file in a bucket, it's going to send an email, a message on a Kafka topic. And boom, you see what happened? I put a file in the bucket, and then at the top right, you see that I had a notification in my Slack. That's what the function does. So let's put another file, redirect.py, upload the file to the bucket. Boom, I get the Slack notification. So here I just wrote a simple function that ties the Minio and the bucket events with Slack. The UI, because I think I'm going to run out of time, we have a very nice UI that runs in the browser. You launch it with a Kubernetes manifest, of course. So loading the function, here you go. So you see the post Python, you can call the function. You see the Slack function, and then you can actually check the logs. We get the logs from the pod. The function here, it's Python, so it's using the Kubernetes Python client and so on. Let's see if I can give you one more. The connection with serverless. So serverless framework is definitely what's being used by a lot of people that do serverless. So we're going to do a Node.js function. So I've installed the serverless framework before. So the shorthand is SLS. SLS creates a template, which is Kubeless, and then, path, I'm going to put it in foobar. So that's the latest release of the serverless framework. It now has support for Kubeless. So you just here created a really rough skeleton of a serverless manifest for Kubeless. So here you see the serverless.yaml. That's the manifest for a function using serverless, and you see that the provider is Kubeless. So people that use Google Cloud Function or Lambda, they use here the provider is Google or it's Lambda. So I'm going to save this. You need to install, a little node module. That's the typical way of installing those functions with the serverless framework. It gets our Kubeless plugin. Have to wait a little bit. Okay, meanwhile, I'm gonna go to the other one, and it was another example here. I'm going to run a front end here on my machine and show you something that's a little bit more involved than the hello world. So here, we did a to-do example, like the canonical to-do example for serverless, and you see the manifest here. So you can define different functions. So functions, you have create function, read all function. They are HTTP triggered function. They have a path. And if we want to deploy those functions with the serverless framework, we just do serverless deploy. And it's going to deploy those functions using Kubeless. They'll run in the in Kubernetes. So we'll see Node.js is a little bit slow. So the module installed here. So now what I can do on this one as well is serverless deploy. That's a function that capitalizes what you pass. That's what we put in the template. So I'm doing two functions at the same time here to gain time. So this is just going to create the custom object. Okay, and of course here there's a problem. So that's Node.js being a little bit slow. We'll see what happens. What happens? Okay, deploying function. So we have a little bit of a timeout. So of course this has not yet been optimized for performance. So the functions, in that particular case, they take a little bit of time to start. That's what's called a cold start. So you see what's happening here. We have, if I look at my pod, my capitalized function, that's the one I created with the skeleton. When I created the template, it's launching this init container. That's how we are able to inject dependencies. And then for the other one, the to-do app, you see that I have the create, the delete function that's there, the read all, the read one. They're all starting, and the looks like this is going to. My demo is not going to work because it's going to take some time. So now when we do function ls, we get all the functions that, it doesn't look pretty like that. It looks a little bit better like this. Well, okay, so that's demo. They're initializing, so The last.
Sebastian, there's making the demo, like execute everything you expect, and then there's actually getting people excited about it. I don't know about other people, but in this room there were 4 cools, and Brian started muttering about, wow, this is why we need this. I hope it's okay to put him on the spot a little bit, but did you want to talk about that a little?
Yeah, I really like what Kubeless is doing. For a long time, almost since the beginning of the project, people have said, I just want a way to run my app, and I think Kubeless potentially could provide a way to do that in a way that doesn't lock people into a lot of restrictions. And so there's some discussions on, since it's actually running one deployment per function effectively, you have potentially a lot of control over how that gets deployed and executed. So as I posted in the chat, I would love to be able to have functions that are Java functions, packages, jars. The init container solution for pushing dependencies. I think there's also a discussion about other ways of doing that, potentially packaging dependencies in the base image that actually gets run and running different base images for different functions, which of course you need to do for different languages anyway. So yeah, I think there's a lot of potential here, and leaning on Kubernetes to optimize things like auto-scaling and fast startup, which will benefit all applications running on Kubernetes, I think is the right way to go.
So I think we're running low on time, and I didn't want to take even more of that, Sebastian, but I thought, Brian's observations might be just useful and let you know that, your demo is successful in all the ways I think that really matter. Do you have anything you want to add, Sebastian, or anyone else?
Yeah, just a quick question. There are some other serverless frameworks for Kubernetes, such as Fission. Can you just say briefly what's the difference between these Kubeless and the other serverless platforms?
Yeah, so just one quick one. So something's happening, unfortunately. But here you see the Prometheus, and you see that we're collecting function total metrics. So you get it for the Slack function. So we have the Prometheus monitoring baked into the runtime. The other solution, so Fission at the beginning didn't use TPRs. So that's why I call it Kubernetes native, is because we don't want to have our own scheduler or our own API server or router. The point of showing you the to-do example is that this example leverages ingress automatically. So when you do serverless deploy, it creates the function and automatically adds an ingress, so you can expose a function to the outside. So basically, Kubernetes native, it means that we reuse all the core Kubernetes primitive, and we just extend API with CRDs.
We should probably move on, just because it's a packed agenda today. I think SIG Apps, like where is the right place to ask more questions and pursue this if people are interested? Is there a mailing list, or just ask Sebastian, whose name is in the community notes?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks everyone.
No, this looks really cool. Thanks, Seb. I think we're up to release updates at this point. Jace, do you want to do 1.8?
Yeah, sure thing. So right now we're sort of teeing up things for an alpha release, and we're also trying to get a head start on release notes. We put out a call to the SIGs to please update the release notes draft template with the things you'd like to add. And our great release notes team, Jennifer and Radhika, are going to be applying some writer wizardry to help make these super readable this time, and try and take some of the feedback that we got from the retrospective on that. So we'll do that. I'm hoping that we'll also give a chance to maybe do some feedback on what a release format draft might look like. I think that'd be a nice opportunity for us to get something usable. So so if you're in a SIG and you haven't submitted your known features release notes, please do that. So we're already starting to look at the way the issues, and especially release blocking issues, play into the end of the release. And just to put a point on this, Maru Nubi's been doing some great work, and Phil Whitrock has also been doing support work there to make sure that the things that are in the merged proposal about how we handle release blocking issues is being automated as much as possible. This is a huge step forward, and it helps lift a burden off the release team to have to manually monitor these things. But essentially, I suggest that people read the proposal that's linked in the meeting minutes, just to understand what the logic behind the bot is, and Phil very detailed explained how this will work in practice. And there's also a link to the pull request for the automation. So if you sync those up, you'll see sort of how it's going to operate. But essentially, release blocking issues will get warnings, and things that are marked as critical, they won't be actually ejected from the milestone automatically. They'll just warn over and over again. And so we may be, or we will be, enlisting the help of SIGs to triage those and make sure that they are either handled with some sort of fix, or they're not seen as release blocking. But we're going to have a very strong dialogue with SIGs around these issues, just to make sure that we're providing the highest quality release we can. And those issues is a key indicator of release health. So we want to watch that as best we can. So I put in there release goals. That we want to make sure that release blocking issues are being worked actively by the owner SIGs, that the end product ships on time, but not at the expense of quality. And so if the release date does slip for some reason, I'd love for it to be the fact that we are doing our due diligence around providing a usable, quality, stable release. And just good, clear signals from issues are going to help us ensure that. Last bit here is that we are planning for an alpha release, which will be alpha.3 on August 23rd. And we will need all of the release master blocking issues, or tests rather, green in test grid. And we will need your assistance to make sure that happens. So as we get up to that Monday before that Wednesday, which I believe is the 21st, would love to have SIGs actively looking at those tests, and if there's something that is not passing, please look at those and triage those and make those a priority, because an alpha without green tests has limited value. And we saw in the 1.7 there was an alpha release that actually helped identify a critical networking bug, and I'd love to see this alpha provide early feedback to release health. It's one of our best ways of doing that. And just in the future, these alpha releases are going to provide a great method for all the downstream integrations and consumers of Kubernetes releases to get some early feedback on their parts as well. So, this is a huge part of the architectural initiative of breaking up the repo and having exterior components. So, yeah, let's take these alphas really seriously, and let's make them the highest quality as we can. And also keep an eye on those release blockers for the alpha release. You might note that I put a link in there, and there's two key links that you'll be able to track during this release. One is bit.ly/18 issues, and the other is 18 features. And there's also 18 rel notes. Those will provide my own personal managed version of what's happening, so you can see it in a little easier format than on GitHub. Just as a general note, the record of note for the release is not in any spreadsheet. It is in GitHub. So take these spreadsheets that I'm using for my own management at your own value. So they may be slightly out of date. If you want the current up to date, all the links necessary to generate these are in the headers for each column. So if you want to see all the current release blocking or critical urgent, those will show up. So that's pretty much it for 1.8. Any questions?
I have one question. Alpha releases are awesome. I can't tell, and I know other people have asked me too, how well they're actually consumed. Is there any way we have any measure or data to know when we cut an alpha release if if users are trying it out, and and do we have any sense even without that empirical data?
Not currently. There's not a good way to do that. But the fact that 1.7, the alpha, did actually register and catch a release blocking bug, people are using them in some capacity. I would love to see us find out how better to improve that signal. And that extends actually to alpha features too. Everything that we do as an alpha anything should have a good amount of visibility so that we can determine if it's worth continuing to invest in.
Yeah.
I can tell you just, this is anecdotal, but internally to the Samsung team, there are activities that we are going to kick off just based on the alpha being cut at all. I don't know how we would provide signal back on that, but I wouldn't be surprised if other groups don't operate kind of the same way.
Cool.
So,
Yeah.
We haven't had anybody jumping up and down asking us for their alpha. Where's my alpha? Where's my alpha? So in terms of people caring enough to come and ask for it, I haven't seen it.
Yeah, and I think that's going to change and evolve. This, like I said, as we break the repos out and the alpha becomes more important, we're going to see a lot more integrated processes around its existence, just like Bob's doing at Samsung.
I think that's what I bring it up, because I think more and more distros and just companies and people are becoming aware that the alphas are important. And so, the more incentives we can provide and awareness that people can see that, I think the more valuable it'll be in general to catch things earlier. So, it seems like the right thing's happening, and how do we encourage it? But we can table this to SIG release too, instead of taking up this time with that thread.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I appreciate everybody in the SIGs helping get those tests screened. That is an absolute blocker, and we do want to provide a good quality alpha.
I have the updates for 1.7.4 and 1.6.8. I reached out to Wojciech and Anthony about like 5 or 10 minutes ago. For 1.7, Wojciech has said that 1.7.4 is being cut in about the next hour. It has the most notable piece is a fix for a scheduler bug that was preventing initially unschedulable pods from scheduling later. It's in the notes. I'll try to get the GitHub issue in there later. And the other one is there's some other smaller fixes, but in Wojciech's words, nothing super serious, just sort of the normal kind of maintenance and tightening up that you'd expect in a patch release. So there also shouldn't be anything there to really disrupt or regress, which is good. In 1.6.8, I believe 1.6.9 is the next patch, but to be cut, but there doesn't seem to be a need. Anthony said, everything looks quiet, so nothing to report, which is good news. SIG updates. So SIG Apps, I believe, is presented today by Adnan Abdul Hussein. Is that correct, Adnan?
Yep, I'm
cool.
Here. Let me just go ahead and share my screen.
Another Bitnami.
Sweet. Let's see if I can do this. Okay, can you guys see my screen?
Yep.
And can you add a link in the meeting minutes to this presentation when you get a chance?
Yeah, sure. If that's okay, I'll do it after.
Yep.
Cool. Hey everyone. So I'm Adnan from SIG Apps, and just to kind of start off, hopefully you have all heard of SIG Apps, but if you haven't, the goal of our SIG is basically to kind of understand how people are deploying and managing applications on top of Kubernetes. So a lot of the stuff that's kind of under our hood are things like stateful sets, daemon sets, deployments, but also just tooling all around the Kubernetes ecosystem. So I wanted to quickly touch on some of the improvements that the SIG has made, I think, since the last update we gave. So we talked a little bit about having more discussion around best practices and patterns, and I think we've seen this in the last couple of meetings. We recently had a really great discussion on best practices for RBAC in charts, and that went really well. So hopefully we'll continue doing those. And we've also been trying to provide more context around the demos and discussions so that in any given meeting, both the demos and discussions are well related, so people can, so the people on that call are really the best people to be around for those discussions. And kind of in conjunction with that, we've been theming a series of discussions. So right now we've been doing a lot of that with charts. So there's quite a few discussions that we have on the agenda for future meetings, just based around different use cases of charts, trying to understand better how people are using them. So I think just after the last update, we started trying to alternate discussion and stand-up meetings, and kind of the reason for this was it was starting to be difficult to fit in both stand-ups and discussion meetings in the same meeting, and oftentimes, this would end up being having the meeting go on for longer. So it just kind of made sense to start alternating those types of meetings, and people who are more interested in the stand-ups can attend the bi-weekly meetings and fortnightly meetings, and likewise for the discussions. So about a month ago, we held a retrospective for 1.7. Thanks to Jace for hosting that. And I'm not going to go through all of the notes from that. There's a link here in the slides if you want to read up on them. But some of the highlights, there's been a lot of great movement in the umbrella projects. So things like Helm have, during 1.7, had a lot of releases focusing on extensibility and bug fixes and enabling chart developers. We had Draft, which was announced, which is a way of kind of streamlining the development of applications on Kubernetes. Monocular, which is a UI for Helm charts, and Rudder Federation is a backend for Tiller to work with cluster federation. Both entered incubation via the Kubernetes Helm organization. And App Registry is also doing pretty well on-prem. Other highlights from that were so flaky tests and issues in core were generally well handled. So that's great. And also something that was kind of brought up from the retrospective was that Kubernetes charts clearly has some scale issues, and over the next couple weeks, we're going to try and focus on helping out charts and trying to take it to the next level. Some highlights from 1.8 and what we're working on right now. So in deployments, stateful sets and daemon sets, we're really looking to get to GA by end of the year, so hopefully by 1.9. And that means that we want to focus most of our work in 1.8 towards stability, consistency, and testing. So getting everything as much as we can done by 1.8, so that 1.9 is an easier release, and we can just move things to V1. Also, we're planning to move everything under the apps API group, so everything's under one single API group. And in particular with daemon sets, we need to decide on whether to use the default scheduler or continue having daemon set act as a scheduler itself. In cron jobs, we're looking to get that towards beta in 1.8. And there's also a proposal and design review going on for defer containers. For each of the umbrella projects, I'll kind of go through them here. We have Helm, which recently released 2.6.0 this week. And kind of following the theme with what we're trying to do with the core features, we're focusing on stability and security here. And Helm just added support for Kubernetes 1.7. This is something that I think the team is trying to do better at, and to keep in sync with Kubernetes releases in the future. And going forward, just again, sticking with the theme to prioritize stability and reliability for the next few releases, trying to get Helm into those more production use cases. We also have Compose, or K-Compose, which is a really quick way to get started with Kubernetes. You can just take a Docker Compose file and convert that to a bunch of Kubernetes manifests. This recently graduated from incubators, so it's now over in the Kubernetes org. And they also recently, I think last week, released the first 1.0 release. Going forward, they're focusing on tests and adding support for Docker Compose v3. App Registry, which is a spec from CoreOS for pushing, pulling, and discovering Kubernetes apps. They're working on getting feedback to stabilize the API, figure out how people are using and how they want to use charts, and also improve the plugin that they have for Helm, improve the UX for that. Also, they're also developing a kubectl plugin. So I think the idea is that the plugin would be able to pull down a package, either a chart or whatever it could be, process the templates, and then use kubectl to go and deploy that. So they're adding support for Compose and KSONet as other formats, and I'm sure that will extend as more formats come out as well, and also adding support for Windows. The Kubernetes charts repository, I touched on some of the pain points and figuring out how to scale. We've been trying to improve the communication between the users and the contributors, especially those contributing and sending out PRs. So we created a charts channel in Slack to help improve that. We're also looking at the possibility of moving to a multi-repository model under a single Kubernetes charts org. So currently, charts is a single repository, but moving it to an organization would help with the structure in terms of giving the people who are responsible for those charts more control over what goes in and when. Also focusing on chart testing, so trying to improve the way charts are tested, and the automation around that, so CI and CD. Again, we had a great discussion recently about RBAC in charts, and we also want to continue defining those best practices for things like RBAC, ingress, and PVCs. And also, the common chart is the best place to go and implement these things. So the common chart is basically a library of charts. A library that charts can include into their chart to get common kind of blocks. And also trying to figure out how we can better manage the supported Kubernetes versions for charts, and how we can make this obvious to users who are installing a chart so that they know what versions of Kubernetes the chart works with. We also have Draft, which again I mentioned. So this is a way of streamlining Kubernetes developments, building on top of Helm and charts. They recently released the 060 release. I think it was either this week or last week. And this includes a plugin manager, which will allow them to support different workflows that people need, and also an easier way to test new features before they're included into the core. So going forward, they'll be focusing on UX and also end-to-end testing with the different CI/CD systems. Finally, Monocular, or the code that powers kubeapps.com. So this is a way to, it's just a UI to discover and launch Kubernetes apps. So we recently released 0.4.0, and what we're trying to do here is focus on an in-cluster experience for managing applications. And so this would mean installing, upgrading, and modifying chart releases, managing the chart repositories, and also looking into authentication and authorization. And possibly also looking into integrating with App Registry and Quay.io. So again, just the kind of key interests and activities for our SIG. So every week we have 1 or 2 demos of tooling around the ecosystem. We have the umbrella projects that we've just been through. And again, we're providing feedback and working on features upstream in core as well. Some themes that are going on are charts is a pretty big theme, but also looking into different ways of writing this YAML. And things that have recently come up, things like Open Compose, the common chart, and Kubeless, or what is now KSONet, I guess, are all things that we're interested in. So going forward, again, we want to focus more on charts and help them where we can to support them as they scale out. We also want to continue to support projects outside the Kubernetes org. So some of the things that are under our umbrella are not necessarily part of the Kubernetes organization, but we want to open up stand-ups to any tooling. So even things like Kubeless or other stuff that is not necessarily part of the Kubernetes org are welcome to come and do stand-ups and give us updates on that, because it really does fit into the whole apps umbrella. We also want to have more cross-SIG communication. So recently we had the RBAC best practices, and that was with SIG Auth. We also discussed authentication and authorization for Tiller, and we can also work with SIG testing to improve the flakiness of tests, and things like Helm testing and other things. So that's all I have. Does anyone have any questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
What do you think about? I think given that Helm is a Kubernetes project and the large number of users that use it. What do you think about making Helm support for a release a blocker for that release?
It's a good question. I think I'm not too familiar with the Helm release cycle right now. I know there is a slight delay in when new versions of Kubernetes are supported. On the chart side of things, charts are being tested against Kubernetes heads, so that might be a place where anything that's really kind of backwards incompatible can be spotted sooner. I'm not sure if that kind of answers that question.
I'm asking a question partly by way trying to be nice about expressing an opinion, but I think that I know certainly we were in this position, and I think there's probably a lot of people in the community that are in the position where, because they have such a high dependency on Helm for their application support, they're effectively gated on the update of the cluster version to Helm support being there. So at least you could make the case for the fact that they ought to be co-released.
So I think what would be helpful is Helm did actually call out that it can talk to a Kubernetes 1.7 cluster as part of its release, but I didn't see an issue that was linked to that described when a release of Helm was coming out that would support 1.7 and what sorts of features this might impede users from using. So I think part of the reason none of the charts in the Helm repo are blocked is because they're all holding back to 1.6 specific features, right? So, I mean, it seems to be working okay, but I just don't know like what people are actually missing out on. And just sort of speaking as a member of the release team, the multi-repo world and coordinating the releases of multiple things all at once in lockstep is kind of an anti-pattern, and we need to find a way to make sure that we could release on independent cadences, but be clear about what is and is not supported in that.
I completely agree with that. I can't imagine blocking the release of the core based on the status of an ecosystem component. Where we're trying to get with kube control right now, we officially only support one release of version SKU. We're trying to make kube control work, so as long as an API, the API versions it targets continue to exist, it will still work just like any client should according to our deprecation policy. And if it doesn't the biggest issue is everywhere, it can't round trip the resources or do mutations based on compiled in types. I think that's the blocking issue. That's also an obstacle to supporting all the extension mechanisms we're building as well. So that work is ongoing.
Anyway, just trying to give the compliment sandwich of like, it is really cool that Helm worked kind of like right out of the box with Kubernetes 1.7 because it was using less than 1.7 specific features. And also kudos to 1.7 for not breaking any of the 1.6 specific stuff, right? So that's all working as advertised. I kind of personally don't even know what I'm missing out on right now.
Yeah, I agree. I think as other people said, I think the onus is on probably the Helm team providing more communication, what actually works and what doesn't work when new releases come out. And also maybe there's a pattern that we can use to make sure we're more in sync with Kubernetes releases.
Yeah, and if it employs some of the same strategies as kubectl does, or even links in kubectl code, then over time it should become the case that older versions will work with newer Kubernetes clusters just fine. That's the goal.
So let's move on to announcements. Sorry, we're muted. Oh, I'm sorry, no. SIG Scalability?
SIG Scale.
Yes, I apologize.
There we go.
Sorry, Bob.
Always risky to ask harassing questions from the audience when you're about to give your own update. So hang on just a second here. Let me share my screen. All right. Can everyone see this?
I can see it.
Awesome. All right. I will move ahead here. Logistics recap. We meet weekly. This is unchanged. There's nothing new here, but just a reminder for folks. So we meet on Thursdays, really just before this meeting. There's an email list, but the group is mostly Slack-based. It's a pretty small but consistent attendee list, which is really great because we're able to have a lot of consistency over a pretty long period of time about some of the topics we work on. I'd say that to characterize the tone of the meetings, we've been shifting from the how do we build bigger and bigger single clusters to how do we ensure that these big clusters are stable with varying loads and densities. I think this is kind of consistent with the overall community trend towards more stability. And I think there is, with that statement, a couple of things. One is that the SIG focus has been really entirely on single cluster scalability. It's pretty clear at some size, and that what that size and architecture is, some kind of multi-cluster or perhaps federated approach is something you should be discussing. That's not been a focus of the SIG. But I would say if you have a burning need or interest in single cluster sizes larger than 5,000 nodes, then please come work with us. That would be great. It'll become obvious a little bit more in some of these updates. I think most people understand that the scalability is not really a node issue as much as it is services, kind of services and loads issue. So varying loads and densities, right? The container density, service density at the 5,000 node level is really the most significant factor. Don't want to go through all these. We're a little bit short on time, but a lot of work going on around the scalability goals. Like the goals.md link there is kind of our thinking from last year. Basically, this is what got us to the big round 5,000 node number with basic SLOs around API responsiveness and pod startup time. We've been working on improving the SLOs to make them more meaningful, more measurable. We need to split the SLOs into steady state and burst SLOs. We've also been doing some work about making the definition for the environment use those SLOs more specific. So if you want to go through this work, there's a providers config link there. This is, I want to point this out. This is provider definitions. We got input from all of the folks at these various providers, but we really need to extend testing, and Aaron's going to give us a little bit of an extended update on this. But I want you to bear this point in mind when he goes through his bits. Okay, so other significant efforts underway. If you take a large cluster and it's fairly straightforward to come up with some scenarios that create lots and lots and lots of repeated events. The general approach that we're taking here is to move to a kind of state change based system. In the crash loop case, you could think of this as started crashing, stopped crashing, rather than I crashed, I crashed, I crashed, I crashed, I crashed. There's been a lot of work going on this. There's then API changes. Merrick has been working on this. I know he's been working with Brian and in SIG API machinery. So this is one of those kind of cross SIG efforts, but one that's probably significant enough for folks to have some awareness that this is going on. I don't believe that there's going to be anything that's going to land. There's work going on during 1.8, but I don't think there's anything that's going to land in 1.8, although I'm kind of speaking for Merrick in this case, and you should take my status update on that with a grain of salt. I could pause here, or maybe Brian wants to give us some comment on that at the end. The other thing, and this is kind of back to kind of large clusters with large densities of services. Red Hat's been doing a lot of work in this area. If you look at something like 10,000 namespaces in a cluster, you start running into issues around API, the need to support paging in the API. Again, cross-SIG kind of efforts. And the latest plan on this is to have some kind of, this is believed to be kind of a low impact change. So the idea would be to go to an alpha beta GA kind of cadence, 1.8, 1.9, 1.10. Again, I think Clayton is the one that's been leading this. So if he wants to add any clarification at the end, that'd probably be good. Also, quick note, I think some of you who may have been tracking what's been going on with conformance testing with Kubernetes are aware of Sonabuoy. We had a very good presentation last week. This has been a long-running issue in the scalability SIG around how do we collect and share results in some consistent way, and we're pretty interested in piggybacking onto the conformance effort to create like a scalability profile, if you will. A conformance test and a scalability run would not, of course, have the same test in it, but we would be able to use the same tooling and the same pattern. So I think what we should do here is, so Aaron attends both the SIG testing, but also SIG Scalability. As you might expect, there's a lot of crossover between the scalability world and the testing world. So
sure, I'll go real quickly because we're low on time. So as usual, I'm talking about somebody else's awesome work. This was basically follow-up from a retrospective item from the 1.7 release. Where we noticed that performance problems were caught late in the release cycle. We didn't actually notice that the full-scale tests were missing their performance SLOs until we were like well into burn down. So we came up with a proposal to regularly run full-scale tests of 2,000 and 5,000 nodes. So this is above and beyond just the use of kubemark to bring up fake nodes and look at sort of the algorithmic API stuff without, assuming we've got perfect nodes. Where we are today is that we have sort of a weekly schedule. We use the 5,000 node correctness and performance test as release blockers. So the performance test makes sure that we can stand up the 5,000 node cluster, real nodes, and that we can throw the density test at it, and that the two big round SLOs of like API latency and pod throughput are met. We then use the correctness test to make sure that we can stand up all 5,000 nodes and have the rest of the E2B tests pass and have the cluster sort of behave as expected logically. You can see in the slide the rest of the schedule for spreading this across not just GCE, but also GKE. And we also do 2K node runs over the weekend. Next slide. You'll notice I'm talking just about GCE and GKE here. We'd really love to see other providers volunteer to stand up 5,000 or 2,000 node clusters, and we would gladly use this data to factor into whether or not a Kubernetes release is really ready to go. Next slide. Just quick implementation detail. We run the tests on Jenkins. We're using Jenkins cron job in order to kick this off. Those are the links for that. If you want to see the specific configurations used to stand up the clusters, including node size, disk size, QPS flags, those are the environment variables that are used to set that. Next slide. We're being, SIG Scalability is being a good test grid citizen, so they have their own dashboard called SIG Scalability. That dashboard has 3 tabs, both all of the specific kubemark tests that SIG Scale is interested in from an algorithmic perspective, as well as the GCE and GKE scale tabs, which include those 2,000 and 5,000 node run results. Let's go back to the slide. You can also see that release master blocking link there. That's the test grid that shows all of the jobs that actually are considered, like all of these have to be green in order for a release to be cut. This is the same list of jobs that Anago uses to verify whether or not it should actually cut a build. And you can see that the scale correctness and scale performance jobs are on this tab. Let's go back to the slides. Next slide. Just a cool little thing that we implemented along the way. It turns out that the previous way we were collecting logs was to SSH to each individual node, copy those logs down onto Jenkins, and then shove all of that into GCS all at once. GCS being the place where we shove all of our test artifacts, logs, JUnit XML, things of that nature. That turned out to take about 4 hours with the 5,000 node run. So
we're down to like 2 minutes left.
Okay.
I don't mean to time box you too much, but
Yep, just real quick. So we managed to use a tool to have every node basically directly write their logs to GCS. It's not streaming, it's copying, but that took us from over 4 hours to less than 20 minutes for the 5,000 node test. There are links on how we've turned that on for all the scalability jobs and think it's working well enough that it would be worth turning on for all jobs, period. Next slide. Back to Bob.
Yes, so can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay, great. No, just I'll say what's a feature, what's not a feature, interaction with the feature repo is a actively discussed issue in SIG Scalability, and even the previous work would be a good example of that. So,
right. Thanks, everyone. Sorry for time boxing it. We're kind of out of time a little bit for announcements. 2 of them are really fast. KubeCon's coming. If you go to the community topic doc, you can see a link to the site and where to submit proposals. Deadline is 8/21. 1 week until office hours. Again, you can see the link there. We're down about 30 seconds. I was really hoping that we could have more in-depth conversation today about the steering election and what the role means. I think it's awesome to see the community really work together and just sort of listen to each other and talk about who they think are, good leaders or people that they trust. I know at least I've got a lot of questions myself about what does the role really entail, and what are people signing up for and things of that nature. I was hoping today that we could talk about that, but it looks like we're out of time, so we're probably going to table that till next week.
Yeah, the short of it is I tried to write a little bit of an explanation about that in the original announcement thread, so you can see it there. But it's really going to, for the foreseeable future, the role is going to be about helping them figure out how to run the project. So fleshing out the rest of the governance, because we're only scratching the surface, and things of that nature. Deciding how decisions get made, where they get made.
Can you give a quick sentence between that and SIG architecture? Because I feel like some of the people who approached me are asking about, is it going to be like this? And it sounds like that's more SIG architecture sort of area.
For the most part, the steering committee is not going to be making technical decisions. They're going to be deciding if issues get escalated to them. They're going to be deciding where those technical decisions should get made. Like, should SIG node own this, or should network own this? Should SIG architecture own this? Those are the kinds of things that we get decided there.
And we can cover more of this next week, but we are at 11 o'clock.
And also, the mailing list, I think, is a good place to ask questions and continue this conversation, too. That's it. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for hosting, Mike.
Yeah.
Register to vote.
Rock the vote.